Happy early New Year and welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange with Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan. You can follow them on X at Palillo and at Josh Jordan 975 and read their work on sportsmap.com. A national MLB insider set social media ablaze with his Dodgers comments, but do they hold water as it relates to Houston? We're going to get into Alex Bregman's agent's comments, and they seem to be aimed not so subtly towards the Astros, and how another big deal may reset the market on Framber Valdez's value. Before we get into that, just a reminder to click like on the video, please, if you want to see more offseason content. Hit subscribe and to the channel if you haven't already, and click the bell for notifications so you know when new bonus content drops. If you're on the go, we're on all your favorite podcast apps like Apple and Spotify. We mentioned it last week, but worth another shout out to your continued support. Thank you so much. You guys have been amazing in watching and listening and commenting and engaging with the content during the off season. So we really do thank you. Gents, I wanted to start here because over the weekend, Jeff Passan created a firestorm on social media after his praise of the Dodgers throwing around money during the off season. I'm going to read the tweet here. He says, "The Los Angeles Dodgers are a machine. Not only do they print cash, their willingness to spend it in pursuit of winning is unmatched. They put their money where their mouth is. Others could benefit greatly from the same approach. They choose not to." So when he got someone retorted immediately and say, other teams don't put their contracts on layaway, Jeff responded back. Bobby Bonilla, Ken Griffey Jr., Francisco Lindor, and on the list goes on for deferred contracts. Before you complain, understand a little history. It's not hard. So obviously he was a little miffed at those comments, responses back at him. So he does seem, though, to not get into the fact that the Dodgers have a TV deal that is unique to their market. What do you guys think of Passan's comments, especially as it relates to a team that's in a market like Houston?
Well, Passan's right, but he oversimplified. Who said life is fair? Russia versus Ukraine, Walmart versus mom and pop shops, the Dodgers against everyone not located in New York. The players will not agree to a salary cap. So to put it all on the Dodgers and all the whole system's unfair, the players are culpable in this then, on this component of it. Plenty of small and mid-market owners would be for a salary cap, but the player's position has always been over our dead bodies. So are we heading toward a labor Armageddon with the current collective bargaining agreement that expires after 2026? It's not the Dodgers' fault that they have buckets full of cash beyond what franchises collectively, several of them, could come up with. The players also agreed to layaway, the ability to defer money. Now, Passan citing individual other contracts, he's on point, but that's different from the same team doing it with 5 or 6 and running up the credit card to over $1 billion. Now, the vast bulk of that is Shohei Ohtani. Unique contract, unique player, unique market. And that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, I mean, it's apples and oranges here. You know, the Mets spent more on one player than Jim Crane spent to buy the entire Astros. I mean, it's very different for certain organizations. But I also wonder if the Astros had more money, would Crane spend over $150 million on a player? I'm not so sure he would. If he wasn't going to do it for Kyle Tucker, I don't know if he'd do that for anybody. So obviously I can't know that, but I wonder if that's just a philosophy that he's locked in on, regardless of how much cash they have available.
I will cite my alternate golden rule. When you have most of the gold or more of it than others, you get to make rules. And that's where the Dodgers are, but they have to operate within a structure collectively bargained and agreed upon amongst owners and players.
I agree with him to an extent, and I think his comments were probably aimed more at the teams that don't spend, the teams that probably are reasons why there should be a good argument for a salary floor when it comes to the CBA. But I also, I think, like you, Charlie, he's oversimplifying it. I think what the Dodgers can do that other teams can't is prioritize their long-term investment into their organization. And that's what deferring money does. It devalues the organization in the short term, but in the long term, because they're investing and they can, garner these ratings. And I've seen a lot of people say, oh, well, Houston's the fourth biggest city in the country. Yeah, but population does not equal media size or media value. Houston's the number 6 media market, but the drop off is substantial after New York, LA, and Chicago. And all those cities have legacy franchises and fan bases. Houston's population boom has come from transplants coming from other markets. So that doesn't necessarily mean that when they come here, they're going to be Astros fans, especially the California transplants. They're already going to have their teams that they are rooting for, which happen to be a rival of Houston. So I think, not to mention that the Astros have only been a contending organization for the last decade. And so you haven't really built up that legacy fan base that these other teams have. That's, again, no one's fault but Houston's. But the Astros viewership, even in the prime of this run, doesn't touch the viewership of a market like the Dodgers. Not excuses, just food for thought. I thought some other interesting comments came from former Astro Josh Reddick, who was on Chandler Rome's new podcast, Crush City. You should go listen to that if you haven't checked it out yet. But Reddick said he's in support of Jim Crane's philosophy. He said in the long term, he thinks it'll serve him well by not giving out these big contracts that pay guys inordinate amounts of money on the back end of their careers. But, he also said, realistically for a guy like Bregman, who's already won 2 rings, his priority is going to be his bag, where other guys maybe might prioritize winning more. This brings me to a couple of quotes that got dropped last week after we did our recording. First was from Dana Brown, saying that the team had to pivot after the talks with Bregman stalled. And then Scott Boras later said that over time, teams learn if you're running from leadership and talent, you're running away from the ultimate goal. So clearly, I think, says it without saying it. This is comments pointed at Houston. So does he have a point here about how the Astros are operating? Or is this just sour grapes after not getting deals done with his clients like Correa and Bregman?
Sour grapes soaked in battery acid. But Scott Boras is going to say what serves Scott Boras and his clients best. And if you don't kowtow and give him all the money he wants, well, then you're being miserly. The Astros have consistently been top 10 in payroll for years. You can't pay everybody all the time unless you're the Dodgers, or you choose to eschew year-to-year operating profits. Dodgers, New York markets, and the Cubs, yeah, they can go to a higher level beyond where the Astros can get. Well, 2023, my understanding is the Astros are a top 5 revenue team. So they can't play the poverty card. They're not Milwaukee. They're not Kansas City. They're not one of the Florida franchises. But that doesn't mean they just pay whatever, whenever. Whether it's the Golden State Warriors, San Antonio Spurs, New England Patriots, great eras and runs end. And that could be just the territory the Astros are creeping into. But the idea that, well, Jim Crane is running away from success, these teams haven't tripped over themselves to pay Alex Bregman what Scott Boras deems him worth.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think both things can be true. I think he's upset he lost leverage here. He had that reported deal that the Astros put out there for Bregman is like a floor, we start negotiating. This isn't acceptable, so it goes up from here. He doesn't have that anymore. So that's some leverage that he's upset about. And he's been through this a few times with the Astros. He's represented several players that weren't able to reach a long-term deal with Houston. So maybe he's a little frustrated with that part of it. But on the other side, the Altuve deal he negotiated, you didn't hear him come out and complaining that the Astros weren't interested in leadership and talent when they re-signed Jose Altuve to a huge contract. So it works both ways. But at the end of the day, we can't really sugarcoat it. Like, the Astros got worse this offseason, and they also heavily invested in an aging player who doesn't play a premier position. It's kind of the deal, when they did the Abreu signing, an aging player that doesn't play a premier position. I don't think it's going to turn out like it did with Abreu. I think the Walker deal will be better. But the Astros didn't used to operate like this. And I wonder, does Bagwell have a thing about you have to invest heavily in a first baseman because he played first base? I don't know, but their strategy has kind of pivoted, and I don't think for the better. I think we all miss Jeff Luhnow running this operation.
I'd like Scott Boras to comment on how Anthony Rendon and Steven Strasburg contracts worked out, and how the Angels and Nationals might disagree with, yes, just pay Scotty's clients whatever they want, because that's what winning and the pursuit of excellence and running toward greatness is all about. Pay his guys whatever, whenever, because Scott Boras knows all.
Yeah, and I agree with him to an extent that you can't, you can't run away from leadership and talent, but you also can't defer to talent and leadership at the expense of the greater financial health of the organization, which, that's just part of it. This is an investment for Jim Crane. And so he has to run his business in the way that he is comfortable from a financial standpoint. But to Josh's point on the Bregman situation and the Altuve situation, is it takes two to tango. Altuve's priority was to get the deal done. If Bregman's priority was to be back in Houston, the deal would have got done. I think this goes back to Josh Reddick's comment, which is Bregman's done his winning, and now it's time for his bag. And we don't begrudge him for that. Probably worth noting, though, if we're talking about leadership and talent, specifically on the leadership side, Alex Bregman didn't have the experience to become a leader without his situation on the Astros. Same thing with Springer and Correa. So leadership has its place on a team, but how many of the guys who won in 2017 had that experience or were leaders, right? So outside of Verlander, who they traded for late in the year, the leaders were guys like veterans like Beltran, McCann, Josh Reddick. Those guys weren't people who they necessarily leaned on for production. They were just, locker room leaders. But they are a much less talented team, as Josh noted, now on the offensive side than they were in 2017. So the talent certainly is worth noting. Reddick also said something interesting about the Tucker trade, during his conversation with Chandler Rome. He said that, don't discount the fact that the Astros have intimate knowledge of his medicals, and that we don't know the extent or the treatment of Tucker's leg injury. Do you guys buy in any way that Tucker's health in any way impacted Houston's opinion or decision on Kyle Tucker?
To me, no, in terms of the specifics of this injury. I understand the broader view. And as we have discussed on repeated occasions, if you're not willing to go 7 years, 8 years on a premier player, taking him through age 33, 34, maybe 35, I mean, when are you going to do so? If your philosophy is never, okay. But this was a bone break. It took 3 months for the Astros to either realize and or acknowledge, oh yeah, it was a bone break as opposed to a bruise. But when bones heal and bind, he's not more liable to have a shin fracture. It's not like it's a degenerative hip that's going to need to be replaced, or Lance McCullers' arm, where he's just a ticking time bomb toward his next injury. I just think they didn't want to go 8 to 10 years under any circumstances with any player, and they did not have a sliding scale on the age of the player during that contract for that to be the case. They offered Bregman 6 years, which would take Bregman through his age 36 season, 4 years in a row. Alex Bregman's been an inferior player relative to Kyle Tucker, right? Kyle Tucker, higher WAR, more overall output, missing half the season than what Alex Bregman put up in 2024. So they were willing to go through age 36 on Bregman because they stretched the rubber band. We'll do 6 years, although we hate it. But you wouldn't do 7 on Tucker, which would only take him through his age 34 season. There is some disconnect within their philosophy, at least from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, outside of Dana Brown coming out and saying they're going to sign Tucker long-term and he's going to be an Astro forever, we heard rumblings for years that Tucker wasn't interested in taking a hometown discount. He wanted to go to free agency and get a max value contract. And, Charlie just laid it out. The Astros didn't want to commit that many years to him. So I don't buy the injury thing at all being a part of this. I just think it was a business philosophy that Jim Crane wasn't willing to do with Tucker. And also, you have to point out with Reddick, just you have to take some of it with a grain of salt that, he thinks this is going to help the Astros and maybe this could have come in there. He does kind of work for the team. He's done some of the broadcasts, pre and post game shows on Space City. So, I'm just saying you have to factor that in, that he does work for them, and I'm sure he doesn't want to upset the Astros. That just, it's good for his business.
That is very, very true, and it's something to keep in mind. And I also think it's interesting to kind of caveat it, was when Houston let Correa walk. Fans, a lot of fan backlash on that. Correa bet on himself and entered free agency again that following year, and then came to deals with the Mets and Giants, both of which ultimately passed on him because of those medicals. We didn't really even hear the extent of those medicals until after he had been gone for a couple of seasons. So it is worth noting that when it comes to knowing the granular levels of health for these guys, that really only the teams know, because a lot of that stuff is not out there in the open. Especially with a team like the Astros, which play so close to the vest when it comes to player health. I wanted to talk about this too, speaking of contracts and the Astros' willingness to sign these long-term deals. Corbin Burnes signs a 6-year, $210 million deal with the Diamondbacks. Now, Burnes is 30. That's just a year younger than Framber. Do you guys think this deal will have kind of that Juan Soto effect and maybe readjust Framber's market value and maybe make the Astros reassess what they think his trade value ultimately would be?
I don't. Framber's next contract will start when he's 32 years of age, so a notable gap of 2 years. I just don't think the Astros have had any intention of being in the long-term Framber contract business because of the postseason performances, the age, when the big fat deal would kick in. But if they were to trade him now, I think they absolutely should assess the market. And if you get what you think is $1.50 for $1, then you have a challenging call to make. But if you trade Framber for even a couple of really good prospects, while you're not flat out punting on 2025, I think that is the tipping point from going from still being the favorites in the weak American League West to being less than likely to make the playoffs in 2025. If you trade the one season in, season out, durable, quality starting pitcher on this staff. Hunter Brown hadn't done it yet for a full season. Ronel Blanco hadn't done it yet for a full season. Will both of those guys be really good and hold up healthily? Then you get to the Arrighettis and the Wisniewskis and Luis Garcias of the world. So if you trade Framber, unless you're getting major league starting pitching of quality back one form or another from elsewhere or in the trade, the Astros are seriously imperiling the streak of 8 consecutive postseasons.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think they should consider it, though. And we talked about this in other podcasts, just rip off the Band-Aid. And if you're going to let Framber walk, try and get as much as you can for him right now. And we're seeing how expensive these pitchers are. So teams they're looking around. Is there a guy I can trade for where I wouldn't have to commit all this money? I even saw Luis Castillo with the Mariners. Teams are sniffing around them. Would it be better to try and make a trade with them instead of having to pay top dollar for these pitchers? But it's just showing you that the price of poker is going up. Over $200 million for a pitcher is something that is going to become pretty regular now. And it just makes you wonder, are the Astros ever going to kind of shift their philosophy and adjust with the times a little bit? Because it's not just the big market teams. You mentioned that, that's the Diamondbacks handing out $200 million. Bobby Witt Jr.'s deal with the Royals is like $288 million. So it's not just the big market teams that are scratching these checks. You just wonder, how long can the Astros keep doing this and have that type of success continue, especially if you are just going to let Framber walk out the door and not get anything for him.
Quickie perspective on the Burnes deal with the Diamondbacks, who swooped in out of seemingly nowhere. No one had linked. It's getting near a decade ago that the Diamondbacks signed Zach Greinke to basically the same deal, 6 years, $206.5 million. So actually very little inflation for an elite starting pitcher for the Diamondbacks to get him, but it's still $35 million per year. I do think we touched upon this before we started rolling, that if you're Jim Crane, do you run the risk a little bit of thinking, my poop doesn't stink? all we've been doing is winning and winning. And yeah, we tailed off a little bit. We were still in the playoffs, and anyone can lose in a 2 out of 3 or a 3 out of 5, right? Winning is the best deodorant, they say. At some point, the stink overpower deodorant. The Astros don't seem to be close to stinking yet, but the trend is downward. Is the next step a doozy, a precipitous fall? But there is that element that no doubt, whether consciously or subconsciously, probably both factors in, they're swimming in a shallow pool in the American League West. Right? Where the Astros are, they would not be taken at all seriously if they were in the American League East, the National League East, or the National League West right now.
I think also there's probably something to keep in mind too, is that you can have like the Diamondbacks or the Royals. It's like you have a team that you have a core of young players too, where you can kind of plug and play with these larger free agents. Whereas the Astros free agency money is spread a little bit more out because of the fact that they don't have so many young guys. I mean, granted, Pena's still on a smaller deal. You just paid Javier, so he's not on a cheap deal anymore. But you have less and less of these guys in which they're on these small rookie deals. So the more and more, or the less and less you have of this cheap labor, the more and more you have to spread out your free agent dollars. I wonder, do you guys think that it's also maybe the state of the team and the fact that they are maybe closer to a retool than they are, being in that championship window? Do you think that also is a deterrent to defer contract? Because you're talking about deferring deals that are down the road. Well, if your franchise, if the winning takes a nosedive and you go into a period in which you're having to rebuild over a couple of years, and then you've also got long-term debt on the books in which you've deferred, money that you paid for this year to kind of bridge the gap. Do you think that could be, we've talked about, Jim Crane's not a young guy. He could be looking to sell the team the next few years. Do you think just organizational value could be something that's preventing him from doing a deferral?
I mean, it's another macro factor that we've discussed before, that they paid $610 million for the team, could sell it for easily over $2 billion. So I don't want to say they're just accounting errors. If you blow $10 million here, $15 million there, in the case of the 2025 Astros, $60 million potential dead dollars. Abreu and Montero, almost absolutely, positively so in Abreu's case. Montero, McCullers, Javier. Or is this the economic reset year? They're knocking on the door, the first tax now. So for those hoping, there's still Santander or Profar. Either of those guys blows through the first tax. Santander actually gets you close to the second tax threshold. And what if you need to make acquisitions within the season because you're on the cusp, at least, of being a playoff team again? Or is this a bit of the, retrenchment for a season of sorts, and then the Astros assess where they are heading toward 2026? The last year of the CBA, and then who knows, just maybe there is a salary cap coming in the next deal, or some sort of breaks to be hit on deferral of contracts, something to check the richest of the richest of the rich, because the Astros are rich.
I think they're kind of trying to play both sides a little bit here, because if they were really winning this year is the most important thing, then they wouldn't have traded Kyle Tucker. So that tells you that is not the top priority, is winning a World Series in 2025, or they wouldn't have traded him. The other problem is you just don't have a lot of talent in your minor leagues ready to come up and take these positions. So you're having to pay guys, and that's what's one of the downside of Walker is, having to give up some draft picks by signing him. I saw some Yankee fans that were kind of happy that the Astros did that, because it's going to hurt their already weak farm system. I know they'll get one back for Bregman, but either way, losing young talent with an organization with a farm system like this is not ideal. But they felt like they had to address first base. But, as I pointed out earlier, it's a non-premium position, and you're paying an aging player a lot of money. We've seen that fall off with Abreu. I don't think that'll happen here, but there is risk in doing this.
There is. We'll see how it plays out for the 2025 season. That's going to be it for this episode of Stone Cold Stros. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to click like on the video if you haven't already. And if you listen to them on the podcast, like places like Apple or Spotify, be sure to do us a solid, give us a 5-star rating. Charlie, Josh, and I will join you Monday for our continued off-season coverage, but you don't have to wait that long to get your Houston sports fix. All you have to do is subscribe to this channel, Sports Map Houston, and our other channel, Sports Map Texans on YouTube. We'll have more content for you during the week, including a preview of Texans Titans that'll drop Thursday over on Sports Map Texans as part of our Texans on Tap podcast, which you can find in audio form at places like Apple or Spotify or wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. Thanks for listening. Until next time, go Stros.